is to kind of bring it home with regards to what we've talked about today. We've talked a little bit here about certainly the challenges to BPM, the barriers, how to sort of get around them or blow through them or whatever metaphor you prefer. We've certainly, I hope you've seen how you might be doing that certainly with the tools. We're certainly excited about how we've brought this stuff together. And now what I'd like to do is to basically talk a little bit more about what people have done with it, right? The kinds of challenges they've looked at, the kinds of successes they've been able to achieve, and you know, what kind of best practices sort of come out of that. Probably, certainly some of the best practices will be things you've heard before, but then again, that's also good, right? If you're hearing the same thing from many different places, it means there's something to it, right? Okay, so to begin with, you know, customers across industries, here's our sort of standard disclosure. We've got customers certainly in every major industry, right? And that have used these tools and been able to do some very interesting things, as you can see here. So finance through public sector, certainly transportation through energy, some very exciting things are certainly starting in energy these days, and transportation. And then insurance, healthcare, retail, et cetera, et cetera. But, you know, let's get down to more specifics. I wanted to give you kind of broad brush there at a high level. We were talking earlier about tactical and strategic, so I've sort of segmented things, you know, a little bit here that way. And some of the examples that we'll look at here are on the higher level, things like complying with regulation, right? Simplifying a core process we talked about before, here, order management. The seasonal process that I mentioned, right? Or just a grossly inefficient one that's got a bunch of errors. So I basically removed names of companies because some companies don't want you to talk about them by name and the rest of that stuff. But, you know, the things that are really key here are what they've been able to do and how they did them. So for financial services, certainly the regulation aspect is something that's big and perhaps growing bigger. But the Patriot Act was, you know, one of the big things basically that came down in the last number of years. And there's this know your customer provision, right? And this is basically about, you know, monitoring and understanding what's going on with transfer money. And so to comply with that, this particular bank basically used BPM in conjunction with SOA, right? So automate basically the whole process around it, which included data collection, quality control, exception handling, you know, and things like that, all related basically to loans. What they were able to do, you know, using a process management approach, number one, was, you know, reduce the cost by 30% than it would have taken to use other approaches. What's other approaches? Well, developing an application specifically to do it. Modifying each individual system to talk to each other and all that. So remember we talked about BPM as an environment for change, right? That sort of result alone sort of demonstrates, you know, that's exactly what it is, right? But, you know, certainly I think, you know, in addition to that, providing the visibility that they needed, which you always need great visibility in terms of compliance, they were able to, you know, save substantially on manpower associated with this, right, by 40%. So, you know, regulation comes in, certainly the first thing you need to do is comply with it, and sometimes it takes too many people in order to make that happen. Certainly that was the case here. With this, they were able to reduce manpower, save costs, save time, increase visibility as well. Right? Okay, here's another one with regulations, if you will, and this is in the telecom space. So you remember the whole thing about portability of phone numbers, right? You know, what a major movement forward that was for the world, I think, or at least for the U.S. Anyway, so here's a telecom that used BPM to basically do that, right? And certainly the task involved a lot of different systems, 25 systems, 25 employees in 3 different systems. Right? They were able to use the BPM technologies to automate that. Again, provide greater visibility with notifications and things like that, and integrating with a number of different systems, right? Oracle and Telco specific, which is what they've got here. They were able to, you know, save on labor, right? Going from 25 to 3 people, basically in support of this process. Eliminate an incredible amount of backlog, you know, requests, 15,000, right? And now with this system able to handle basically 80% automatically. And this solution was implemented in 2 months. I think the time frame is also very interesting and important in many of these too. I said briefly in one of the workshops yesterday, and the issue of time certainly came up, and it is key because you want to be able to establish results quickly and then build on those results, right? Rather than delay for long periods of time, some validation of that success and some benefit of that success to the enterprise. So here's one for 2 months. Okay, order management. So here's basically an energy company, right, working with their ERP system. Actually, what this came down to, I think, was multiple ERP systems through acquisition, working with SAP. Right? So lots of human involvement, reordering, re-entering, I should say, in different places. They were able to basically streamline that using BPM, deployed in 5 weeks, so a little over a month, integrated with SAP, and as a result, were able to simplify their system tremendously. Their training on this previous to BPM was ridiculous. It was weeks, right? Where training reduced from months to days. Right? So because there were so many pieces and parts that had to be done manually. Now user interaction sort of reduced, their costs go down, productivity up, and greater flexibility to implement new processes that are that related to this as well, right? Since they've sort of automated this. So efficiency, right? What do we see in these last three? Tremendous improvements in visibility, especially with regulation. Great improvements basically in efficiency in all of them. And efficiency is really, I think, the number one benefit from BPM. It certainly should be. Here's government, and this is an interesting one because this is a, quote, seasonal process, but it's one that every company basically goes through. And that's the idea of personal performance, appraisal, right? You've got basically that notice that comes in the email, this is the month we're going to start doing this, and you ignore it basically for the first few weeks, and then the last week you go, oh, I got to get this thing done. And along with everybody else, and the system just really peaked, right? And so generally, HR has to deal a lot with that spike, with the systems that they're normally using. So this basically took a look at automating that. Again, short time frame, completed in less than 60 days, reduced the audit process from weeks basically to days. This is also a good example of that tactical thing in terms of, remember we talked about the single silo, right? Extending an application, right? And here it's essentially HR. And doing, more of what the process required that was specific to the company, rather than maybe what the HR system, provided. So seasonal process could be anything, depending on the seasons of your business. Inefficient processes, right? We've all got them. Is a manufacturer of lighting equipment, and their process basically was around warranty management. Right? How do they deal with people, doing warranty return authorizations, and all that wonderful stuff? Of course, you want to minimize that, but you need to also handle it in the most efficient way. So this using a SOA infrastructure, right, approach as well. Used BPEL, right, one of the technologies. This was integrating in with eBusiness Suite. We talked about that before. And this implementation was 3 months, right? Providing essentially the, automated access and really self-service for this process. Right? So certainly, greater reduction in errors, probably higher customer satisfaction, which is not even, noted on here, but now customers fill in the form themselves, and they're good to go. But saving $2 million annually, that's pretty substantial. I mean, boy, that frees up a whole bunch of money for doing proactive strategic things, right? So, and you'd think here, warranty management, man, it's not a very sexy process, right? But it's always where the money is costing the company. That's where the greatest value is. But I encourage all of you to be helping find those gems, if you will, in your enterprises that can uncover such great assets and benefits. Certainly, it resulted in the ability to reassign three people personnel-wise. Here's another energy company, and again, going back basically to base systems, right? Here's all about accounts payable. Lots of different customers they deal with in terms of, that bill them, and this is all about streamlining, the hodgepodge of systems that they had and the approval process, if you will, to basically pay them, right? So using BPM, they went to an electronic approval process, right? 7-month deployment integrated with SAP FileNet, right? As you might imagine, there'd be multiple systems here. Greater, better visibility with notification now. Certainly, greater satisfaction with self-service through a portal. Cost per transaction reduced by 80%, right? Realized ROI at 300% over 2 years, right? Again, reduce staffing or redeploy staffing, eliminate manual data reentry, all that sort of stuff. Efficiency, 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 visibility, right? And in the end, this all, the one thing that's not necessarily listed here is also an increase in agility. Because once they've done this, then the ability to change that process, right? Down the road, if they've implemented good governance, right? The ability to change that process is easier than before. So these are all sort of great results. So here's something that, is a snapshot from above, talking about the time frame to deploy processes. And these are people doing it sort of for the first time, right? So that also, I think, is pretty significant. But that big red chunk there in the upper right is 1 to 3 months, and that was over 20%, right? And then the gray spot basically down below is 40% for 4 to 6 months. So when you look at from 1 to 6 months, which sounds pretty reasonable, I think, in terms of being able to get the benefits depending on the nature of an individual project, that's pretty big, right? 63% basically in 6 months or under. So we think that that's certainly pretty key. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about then the strategic side, right? And we'll look at things like, business transformation from process-centric perspective or customer-centric, the need to support higher revenue growth, right, for enterprise goals, as well as, mission-critical process support. So here's a process-centric transformation, basically. It's a conferencing provider, and who essentially grew, like all these telcos, do a lot of acquisitions, but they like to basically differentiate themselves based on personalization of service. We tailor, your conferencing needs to you with our technology. So in order to do that, they've got to have very efficient systems that they can, adapt to your needs. So that's what they basically were looking at. They used BPM technologies and, deployed 6 months basically for their first process. And within 15 months, basically did all the rest of their processes. And what it enabled for them, they knew they needed the transformation in agility, right? But what they didn't understand, and that happened, was there was this process-centric, basically, transformation that occurred where now when they get a new requirement for, a need from business to come in, they start thinking about it in a process perspective rather than an application perspective. And they break it down into the key parts of the processes and, understand what they can reuse and what's like this. And they said for them, it was incredible. It was like the lights turned on. And it really, you talk about agility then, that really enabled them to solve these challenges faster. And certainly by reusing other stuff, cheaper for that matter. So transformation to a process-centric view certainly provided a more agile foundation for them. Okay, here's a telco, another telco, I guess, and this one's about basically a SOA infrastructure transformation. And, you usually see these with companies that have grown, acquired companies, and they're still sitting with all these systems that are point to point and have existed for a lot of years that have grown much more brittle, right, over time, and they need to make that change. And that's where, certainly SOA has great appeal, and we've certainly seen that. But this is a Latin American telco that was created by privatization. So basically the government said, okay, we're not going to be the telephone company anymore, it's going to be private, right? And so they basically divested all these different, regional telephone companies, merged them together into 16. And of course they had integrations already, but they were inefficient point-to-point things, right? 20 systems, 380 links. So you can imagine, this is a great SOA story, of course, right, as well. But, they needed to basically reduce their costs and provide for greater agility. And using BPM as part of that, they integrated with Siebel's, SAP, and mainframe apps, right, as part of this whole deal. In the whole sort of perspective of things, they can develop services a lot cheaper now because of the efficiency that they've got. Much faster to basically deliver new services to the market, 20%, right? Better product quality and better efficiency sort of across the board. Right? So this is that combination, SOA, BPM, and the synergy basically that can provide. And certainly here in a much needed environment to begin with. So here's one basically supporting revenue growth. Right? So here's a healthcare company, right, that was dealing with Medicaid submission, processes, if you will. And for them to grow, they needed to support more submissions, right? Yet they were basically kind of tapping out. But they had as their strategic goals to basically have this growth, 30, 40%. And they also wanted to grow and support, adding, new capabilities as well to expand the business in the future. So using BPM, they were able to basically bring this sort of together. And, with that certainly help their total cost of ownership, and provide an environment for change that was, much more effective. And give them the visibility that they certainly needed, right? The ability to schedule and track events automatically throughout the enterprise, and allow them basically the flexibility to manage sort of, this process and the growth in this process. So, here from the top, it's revenue growth, how you're going to achieve it. We're tapped out basically in the infrastructure that we've got. How do we solve it? Time and time again, we've seen a number of examples here where the BPM, the process management approach, is actually less costly than the traditional development approach, right? And that's sort of the way they went, and certainly gives more flexibility. Here's a core process for a bank, loan approval, right? They wanted to grow and expand market share, right? As well as, increase their level of service. Using BPM, they were able to do this and move away from paper, right? It's one of those, still stuck on paper things. For them, it enabled them to balance their work, easier in terms of how it was performed by, existing staff. Certainly when you got visibility, that can happen, right? Looking at that simulation that Mira was showing us, there you got the ability to balance it even before you deploy it, for that matter. Improvements basically in end result, 13% improvement in same-day turnaround, right, of closing documents. So doing it much more efficiently and faster, for that matter. And then providing great visibility, right? Branches have instant access to all the information related to that loan application. Efficiency, visibility, agility, time and time again. What it means to your company is certainly specific to what the challenges are. Right? Insurance, expanding basically the channel for more revenue growth. Here, bringing in an online channel, making that more productive, using BPM to do that, and certainly, again, transform the business by, now they look at things that are from a process perspective rather than a development view. Right. Another energy one, and this is basically about, again, providing I think one we looked at earlier about the infrastructure, right? Modernizing the infrastructure because it became too brittle. and certainly as a result more costly over the long term, slower to change, and resulting in customer issues as well. So process-centric instead of application-centric, in terms of the solution along with SOA. They established a Business Process Competency Center. That's one of those things essentially that does help you on an ongoing basis manage, these processes certainly as they evolve over time and provide the guidelines for how to do that, right? As a result, I think, forget the ROI, forget the efficiency. One of the big results for these folks is, senior business execs now realize, that cross LOB processes and their optimization is what's key to future growth. So, earlier in the first session when I showed you that diagram of strategic processes and how many of them cross all those different silos, right? That's really here what they were able to benefit from and certainly learn, where they could derive advantage. Okay. So that's sort of a, overview, a sampling, a buffet selection, if you will, of success with BPM. They've certainly been able to break through their barriers. Let's talk a little bit about some of the best practices that kind of come through from that, right? Certainly finding the right process, right? Picking the process that you should go after is one of those, right? There's a great graphic I have on other slides that basically it's a coordinate frame, right? And you're graphing essentially in the vertical business impact, versus on the horizontal complexity, right? Either way. And basically, when you look at the four corners of that, those quadrants, what you have is a progression from, minimal impact, minimal complexity, all the way up to great impact and great complexity. Well, okay, you want great, impact, but you want as minimal, complexity as possible, right? And that's where a lot of these tactical projects are, right? If you're only integrating one system, SAP or whatever your legacy system is, to improve that process that you need in that, that's a lot less complex than integrating with 10 of them, right? But in terms of picking the process, we certainly advise customers to be looking at those two metrics, right? Because you have to achieve business impact. Otherwise, you'll never, be recognized for the success that it delivers, right? And business impact is generally where the business tells you they've got the problem, right? That's the easy one. But then along with that, picking the right process in terms of certainly where you are in the use of BPM in terms of the complexity that you may want to address, right? That also helps you achieve number two, right? Quick and early wins, right? You achieve a win that you can demonstrate the benefits here. You get more people on board, even some of those that were hesitant on certain parts of the business in the beginning to help you go forward, right? Building momentum, that's what it's all about. Also clearly as part of that, the reason you're doing it is because you want, the business to buy in. And, the landscape of unsuccessful BPM is littered, with situations where the business didn't buy in, right? Which is basically, number three, right? That's, it's one of those critical key issues, and there's a lot that, we can do from an IT perspective to mitigate that, but it is critical. Governance is needed from the start, okay? This is going back to some of the discussion we had earlier about, how do you achieve a sustainable process management effort after, the initial results are in and people have disbanded perhaps and gone away. Well, governance and having the processes defined to change what you're doing is really the key, right? And having, the right people in the right positions so that you're you're addressing all parts of the organization, certainly the people that have the enthusiasm for it. Also, not the least to mention here, it's not last, is number 5, which is executive sponsorship, right? And I can't say enough about how important that is because it's, ultimately, you get into the organizational issues and, you're dealing with different departments of the enterprise, perhaps, even in a departmental project. And you need somebody who, at a high level can articulate that this is the right thing to do, right? Because, we, the guys that implement it, certainly don't have the authority to have that sort of, recognition across the board. And I've seen some great examples where, this has taken place, as well as great examples. I should tell you one about business buy-in. There's a company that we've worked with down in New Zealand, right? They're a hydroelectric power company called Mighty River. Interesting name for a power company. But there's a number of things on our website, basically. Even there's a video, I think, and an audio there that does an interview with them. But when they engaged the business, they definitely looked at what their big challenge was, which was around change management, for making changes within their power generating processes or whatever the heck it was, some aspect of that. And they took on the big thing that they needed. Now, this kind of flies in the face of keep it simple, right, to start with. But on the other hand, it gave them, undeniable business buy-in, right? Then along the way, they kept these people as part of the governance. They had people at various levels of business as part of the governance process. So they were always part of the ongoing sort of evaluation and review. And that's what kept, them involved. And they had, of course, good executive sponsors, right? And then, the last one here, success has got to be measured, right? And that's all about key performance indicators and ones that are meaningful to your business, some companies believe ROI is the ultimate, one. Others couldn't care less about ROI, right? We dealt with a company that basically provided an HR service. It was about management of employee recognition program, right? Okay, sounds good. The way they measured themselves had nothing to do with ROI. It was basically all about how they could measure customer engagement and success. And, so they have an alternative view of how they look at things. But you know what? That alternative view suits that company to a T. And it's enabled them to be unique in their industry and achieve success. And so they looked at their BPM project the same way. So certainly, define success with KPIs that matter. I don't think any of these you've never heard before, but as I said, it's good to hear things that are supposedly best practices repeated from different sort of venues. Okay, a few final things, basically. We talked about this both, I think now we reinforced it, talked about it earlier. BPM certainly enables you the ability to address tactical needs today while building that strategic foundation for the future. And I think, if you can achieve that, you're setting, the company up well, you're setting yourself up well for some great successes. Sometimes the tactical projects are the best way to incrementally roll it out, and for a lot of reasons. But one of them certainly might be number 3 here, that it's a great way to showcase SOA. In many organizations, SOA was a strategic initiative, and as a result, the business, still has a tendency to be scratching their head about wondering what the value is, right? Well, when you couple an SOA to a BPM initiative that they basically have control over some part of the process, they think nicely about SOA, right? So it's a great way to showcase the previous work even that you did in SOA. And then lastly, I guess I don't have to tell this to this crowd. There's no reason to wait. Start now, because you're all self-selected to come here to this training. So I thank you for your attendance today and listening, and I certainly hope that you continue down this path and that we can do more for you. In that, sort of as a wrap-up here on the product, I think the 3 things that we like to leave you with are the messages that we talked about, BPM Suite being unified, right, with that unified infrastructure, unified tooling, unified social BPM, it being complete, and that you can start today on things that are small, yet that tool will support you well into the future. And as well as, through our collaboration capabilities, handling really the social needs stuff.